It's really fantastic to be here. My name is Abid Virani, one of the co-founders at Fable.
My name's Alvar Pillay, co-founder and CEO at Fable.
All right. So, yeah, we are genuinely thrilled to be here. We decided to come all the way down here for this. This is why we're in New York, is to hang out with you all. So please do take us up on the offer. We'd love to grab a drink afterwards and hear what you think about what we're going to share with you. As co-founders, we don't often get a chance to...
Yeah, it's been a while since we both got to give a talk together.
And part of why we're doing that right now and starting to do that more is because Fable's hitting a new milestone. And part of that milestone is because we're doing what we wanted to do 7 years ago, but we didn't think the industry was ready for it. And a lot of this stems out of Alvar's experience as a UXer and an inclusive designer. So maybe just a little bit of an intro on your background and why did we wait 7 years before giving a talk about cognitive accessibility?
Yeah. So I started my career as a UX designer, and I then got introduced to the Masters of Inclusive Design program at OCAD in Toronto. And when I went through that program as a designer, I kind of realized my own biases as a designer, some of the design decisions I made and how that was causing a barrier to people with disabilities. And for my master's thesis, I actually specialized in designing technology for aging adults, specifically people who experience mild cognitive impairments, so stages before Alzheimer's. And I would go into retirement homes and spend time evaluating social applications, so applications that we used to just keep in touch with friends and family, like chat applications, and put that applications in front of, adults who were over 70 years old. And it was so evident that the designs that we've created are by people who are able-bodied and young, because it was so obvious that none of our designs were intuitive. The participants I engaged with were always confused about the UI. And so when we started Fable, our goal was always to help companies practice inclusive product development. And the way you practice inclusive product development is by engaging with the very people who are excluded. So engaging people with disabilities throughout the product development process, getting insights at the research stage, design stage, development, QA, and once your product is out. And we wanted to do this at scale. We didn't think it was good enough just to get one piece of insight and I got an insight and I can go act on that. We wanted companies to do this on a continuous basis. And so we had to focus on some of the audiences that we felt confident that we can build a community around and also build scalable methods so that companies can start practicing it. Cognitive accessibility 8 years ago, at least with enterprises that we were engaging with, very few companies had that on the radar. A lot of companies hadn't even engaged with people with disabilities in the first place. Companies were just doing audits, remediation, and that constant cycle. So to have some organizations go from not engaging with anyone and then all the way engaging with cognitive audience, we saw that as a big learning curve. And it was more that we wanted to make sure that the engagement was safe even for the participant, right? When you're engaging with a diverse audience, you need to make sure you're creating a safe space that it's easy for you to give feedback. And we just didn't think the audience was, and our customers were ready for that. But over the last 2 years, I would say we're seeing companies increase their maturity. We have a lot of our customers who also practice inclusive product development. And we've also built multiple communities and scaled it. So we thought this was the right time for us to invest in this space. It's personally been my passion. We have a great team at Fable, and we're big believers of trying and iterating. And so what we're sharing with you is our learning so far, and it's going to continue to improve as we take this offering to the wider audience.
So I put in this deck over the next hour we will go through, but we'll keep it tighter than that, we promise. But over the next little while, we're going to talk to you about the Accessible Usability Scale, which is a method that we developed to evaluate usability amongst assistive technology users. We'll talk about what we're learning as we have more and more companies adopt the AUS. And then we'll dive into cognitive and the work we're doing of how do we start to take what we've learned from the engagements we've facilitated at Fable so far and go beyond that. For context, I think we crossed the number. I think we've crossed 50,000 hours of engaging people with disabilities at Fable over the last 7 years. Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah. And I'm a big Malcolm Gladwell fan. So when we hit 10,000 hours, I was super excited to brag about all our learnings. But the reality is that it really was a glimpse at 10,000 hours. At 50,000 hours, we're starting to really have stronger conviction about what we can gain and how we can incorporate people with disabilities best in a product development lifecycle. But we know that there's a huge frontier that we haven't cracked through, which is cognitive accessibility. So we're excited to talk to you about it, and we're eager to hear your ideas. Ultimately, we're building upon the same conviction that we gained by doing a master's in inclusive design, this foundational belief that to solve problems, people who face problems have to be at the core of it. Alvar talked about being a UXer. I came from a background in international development, and my first attempt at implementing or leveraging inclusive design was in a completely different context around young people severely underemployed in a small country called Lesotho. And I was working on how do you engage those young people in economic planning. And the reason I bring that up is because inclusive design is not just a framework for solving problems in the world of accessibility. Inclusive design is at the heart of how we also manage and run our company. It's how we build roadmaps. It is foundational to just the way we do our work. And we'll touch back on that as we go. So I know we've got folks from W3C here, and probably everyone in the room has touched or experienced some element of a WCAG audit or report as they've delved into the world of accessibility. For a lot of people, that's how you get introduced to accessibility, and I was no different in that. We really wanted to bring something to market that was different than WCAG. We felt like audits are tremendous from an evaluative tool and framework, but in a 2-week sprint cycle with 500 developers and product managers and designers and companies trying to really build product at a real pace to keep up with consumer needs and competition, that WCAG wasn't going to be the thing that made accessibility a priority.
Yeah, I think also we were trying to see how can we make it, we think that everyone in the product development process has a role to play in accessibility, but we don't think everyone needs to be WCAG experts. And so we wanted to find a way that we can make accessibility more digestible and relatable. WCAG has like several criteria, but not every developer needs to know that. Every developer needs to know, why do I need to code this way? How is that going to impact the end user? And so we wanted to really take a usability approach to accessibility. And we thought that's one of the great ways of decentralizing accessibility within an organization.
So what we found was we evaluated a lot of different ways that folks measure usability and user experience. And the system usability scale was the one that rose to the top of our list as the most widely adopted. And there's some parameters to it that were really great. So the system usability scale is developed in the mid-1980s. It uses 10 questions on a Likert scale. They alternate in terms of a positive and a negative, and this is really effective at handling acceptance bias when someone's filling out a survey. It's been so widely adopted in UX and HCI, and it's also genuinely used by so many global companies that it felt exciting to build on something that already existed. I was taken aback by this number, but having come from the academic realm of inclusive design, seeing something that was being leveraged in thousands of academic papers also gave some confidence that there's a robustness to this metric, and how can we use what they've built but adapt it? And I wasn't totally convinced until I found this quote by John Brook, who built the system usability scale. I don't know why that got blurred out there. Yeah. But if there isn't a relevant questionnaire for your situation, you can devise one. Well, that was exciting. I felt like it was a little cyber wink of permission to try to play with what he had built and designed, even though it hadn't really been, we haven't seen many edits of it since the 80s. But there is a real reason to do it. So a system usability scale, one of the questions that you respond to in a Likert scale is, I think that I would need the support of a technical person to be able to use this system. So we use the system usability scale with members of our community at Fable. And when we started, our community was heavily focused on folks who rely on screen readers and are blind. So what was really interesting, when we asked someone the question, I think I would need the support of a technical person. Well, sometimes we were putting that question in front of I started with a colleague of ours, Sam Prue, who is blind since birth, an absolute wizard behind a computer. The house runs on servers, codes. He's an absolute technical person. And yet this question was saying, I think I need the support of a technical person. No, I need the support of someone who could see, because I'm doing something that just requires sight. And so we realized that many of the questions in the system usability scale needed to be updated in terms of language that made it more appropriate to folks who are relying on assistive technology. And we're at an age where we don't call things systems. And so, we adapted that question into our accessible usability scale as I would need the support of another person to use all the features of this website. It's a minor change, but when you remix 10 different questions, we ended up at a place where we had a completely different questionnaire. And now we can put it in front of folks who are completely underrepresented in having their experience of usability measured and pulled into the focus for product teams. So we started developing this in 2020. We did it alongside a couple customers. We collaborated with our community a ton. And it was led by Elena Chapman, who's our accessibility research manager at Fable, leading a team of researchers that support our customers. And since 2020, we've now had the accessible usability scale used more than 11,000 times across 3 major categories of assistive technology. So there's a bias towards screen readers there, about 7,000 data points from folks leveraging screen readers. We've created this category that helps us organize a big group of assistive technologies called alternative navigation. These are technologies that emulate a keyboard or a mouse. So it could be switch systems, eye gaze. We include voice navigation in there. So it's quite a mix of technologies in there. And then screen magnification tech. And what we're actually seeing now is our customers, but not only our customers, are using the accessible usability scale as a way to set benchmarks, to compare different products against each other. And it's part of a product health score for a lot of companies. And it's a lot more approachable for a researcher, a designer, a product manager to understand whether or not they're moving the needle on accessibility with all the various things they're trying. So what's really exciting here is just to share that we now have something to compare to. So when we ask a user to go through a product or a flow, we now are able to give them a survey afterwards and compare to a large body of data. Now, whether you're choosing to compare to your own data points, whether you're choosing to compare to Fable's benchmarks, this allows for a different interpretation of, is something working for someone? We tend to think of this after completion. We tend to think of this as a measure of usability. So it doesn't capture were they able to complete the task. We think this is a unit of measurement to use after you have compatibility at a basic level. But what we've observed is companies start in a world of, can a user do the thing we're putting in front of them? And they evolve and mature to start to say, how usable is our product for assistive technology users?
And I think what was interesting with the AUS, what we saw was now there was another metric that product teams can use to measure accessibility. So it's no longer just are we WCAG, 1.0 or 2.0 compliant. It was product teams setting a base level. We've had some of our customers where they've set a base level for all product teams. Like every product team needs to have an AUS of, a certain number. And it's not striving for what Fable's average is. It's more just striving for where you were before and just coming up a few points. And what this made product managers as well, it's made it easy for them to measure like what is the impact of all of our accessibility efforts, which is harder for them to dissect just from a pure WCAG compliancy perspective.
I think the other thing that's been fun about this is the relatability to another part of what product teams are looking at. So if a product team's got a research team that's feeding them data on a regular basis, there's a high likelihood that system usability scale is being adopted there, and now they have something to compare. And what's really neat is that our 50th percentile and the 50th percentile for system usability scale is within a 1-point differential. So they're directly comparable, and now we can actually say how are the experiences of our assistive technology users compared to those not leveraging assistive technology. Everything's an iteration at Fable, and when we set out to build the AUS, we wanted to version it. We expected to version it. And we haven't actually updated the language of the questions because every time we do a benchmark study and we analyze in depth, what we're realizing is that the questionnaire is meaningfully capturing different components of the experience, whether that is the level of confidence, the perceived level of ease, the perceived learnability, like how hard is it for me to get familiar and comfortable with this product? It really seems to be representing appropriately how assistive technology users are feeling when they're navigating products. But I keep using the term assistive technology users, and so I'll get to the fun stuff, which is what about those who don't depend on assistive tech? And that is a question that has been on our minds for many years, and it has been intimidating to open up, kind of the can of worms that might be, because there's a literal element to assistive technology that's more measurable and observable. But let's dive into what this means as we delve away from just focusing on assistive technology users.
And so this is where we get into cognitive accessibility, because so far our community of testers is also categorized by assistive technology. But we knew when we were entering the cognitive space, we can't have that as a requirement, because there are going to be individuals who rely on assistive technology, but there are also going to be individuals who don't. And so what would be the way to categorize cognitive accessibility in a way that, one, makes it easy to recruit, get feedback, and also action on it? But more importantly, why are we excited about cognitive accessibility right now? And in the US, we know that cognitive accessibility is actually the most prevalent form of disability. We know that this is a growing number as well, just based on the number of people that we have aging. So we know that the number of people who are going to rely on cognitive accessibility accommodation is only going to increase. So on the screen, we have a chart of the US population in 1960s to 2060, and you can see how the number of people, just the age groups, are going to increase. And we also have just like a population who are going to rely on accessibility accommodation is going to increase. So we think that this is a market that is going unserved. We have a pretty large user base that needs to be accommodated for, and we haven't done a good job accommodating for them so far. And we also know that this group is going to continue to grow.
I think one thing that's really jumps out to me when we see data like this, where like the population pyramid is almost flipping, it's bulging amongst seniors, is there are stats out there, and depending on the sources, but it's 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 people generally live with a disability. But as you get into the over 65, over 70 range, you start to hear numbers like 1 in 3, 1 in 2. I think as we get into cognitive accessibility, as we get into aging, it's also important for us to start to be a little bit more flexible with that definition of, do you identify as having a disability? Do you have a diagnosis for a disability? Or do you experience cognitive accessibility needs?
Yeah.
Do you want to just talk a bit about that do you want me to jump forward? Sorry, did I get ahead?
Yeah, I think you got it.
Sorry.
But we will come to it. But I think it's a good point to keep in mind, and just like how we categorize needs, and just like the medical model of diagnosis, the social model. We're very much a big believers of a needs-based model. And so, as we get into the space, we wanted to kick off a cognitive accessibility working group, because it's going to be the first time we're going to be doing this. And we thought it was, practice inclusive design even internally as how we go about any new initiative. So we decided we're going to have practitioners in the industry, so a lot of researchers that do inclusive research. We're going to have individuals with lived experience of cognitive disability. We're going to have subject matter experts as invited guests who, live in the space of neurodiversity, clinical diagnosis, just to intentionally make sure that we're always having different perspectives. Because if we got into this just as Fable researchers, we're going to have our own bias in how we build it out. And so we intentionally created a working group where we brought in different perspectives, and sometimes also conflicting perspectives, because we wanted to make sure we debate out how do we want to define cognitive accessibility. And what we did was we have 9 individuals who are part of our working group. It's a voluntary working group, and we divided ourselves up into multiple different task forces. Thank you. And the goal of the working group was threefold. The first one was we wanted to really identify what is the best way for us to recruit for the cognitive audience. What would be the categories that we would recruit? And then the second was, how do we do this in a scalable manner? How do we collect insights from individuals who experience cognitive disabilities, and collect insights in a way that is easily digestible for product teams to action on? And the third part was, how are we collecting those insights? What methods are we using to collect those insights? Because, the reason we introduced the AUS was just using the SUS was because the SUS was not working for this audience. We tweaked it to make it work for this audience. But now, for including cognitive, we need to make sure that our methods are also getting tweaked to support this audience instead of just using general research methods. So those were the 3 goals that we had with the Cognitive Accessibility Working Group. And we set ourselves a couple of milestones. We wanted to be able to, just through our own research and process, we want to be able to share guidelines for the larger community to be able to start thinking about cognitive accessibility. We also went through the process of updating our AUS to accommodate for individuals that have cognitive accessibility needs. We're going to be publishing our approach. And it's going to be a perspective, and it's going to be, our way of approaching it. There's obviously, we're looking for feedback, and we're looking to see how we can improve this. But for Fable, the goal is always, how do we do this at scale so we can help many organizations truly build inclusive products? And the best way we know if something's working is we give it a period of time where we put it out in the market. So we will include this in our Engage product, where our customers will have access to this and they'll get to try it out, and we'll observe how those insights are impacting their insights that they're collecting and ultimately impacting the products that they're building. And so we went through a lot of debate with, especially I think this was Task Force 1 and 2, where we looked at a lot of literature, research papers that existed in the market right now. And we looked at the medical model, of cognitive disability. You have intellectual disabilities, you have learning disabilities, you have traumatic brain injuries, you have dementia and Alzheimer's, neurodiversity. There are various different ways individuals identify themselves within this group. And what we wanted to focus on was very much a needs-based approach. So someone doesn't need to be medically diagnosed. We wanted to make sure, can we just have people self-identify specific needs they have, and then based on that, we can recruit for them. So, and even within the task force, we were like, okay, how many groups can we create? And so we had a lot of different groups. So we decided we just need to start somewhere. And starting somewhere means we're not going to capture every individual's needs, but we're going to capture the needs that we feel most confident about. And that's where we came across the 3 categories of it. We're going to work on individuals that have challenges with memory, so challenges with recall and processing information. We're going to have individuals who have challenges with reading and writing, so supporting users with text comprehension and communication. And we're also going to focus on individuals that struggle with attention and focus. So how can we help design products that don't have you get distracted, but help you focus on the task that you're trying to do? And we thought this would be easy for an individual if they do, whether they do identify as having a cognitive disability or, being neurodiverse. We thought this would be easy for an individual to self-identify and communicate. Yeah, I do have challenges with memory. I do have challenges with reading and writing or attention and focus. And so this will be the 3 categories of cognitive accessibility that we would be rolling out, and then designing our methods based on that. And I want to come back to, we kind of talked about, the aging population and the number of people who experience disability as they age, 1 and 2, as Abid mentioned. And we actually see a huge overlap between cognitive disability and needs and aging disabilities and needs, whether that's memory, attention, reading, and other difficulties, or just like navigating really overwhelming UX experiences. So there is an overlap, and we want to make sure that we're capturing that as we enter this audience. And that's also what gets us excited, because we have a rapidly aging population. We have an aging population that also has been introduced to technology and would want to continue relying on it. And we think that through addressing cognitive accessibility accommodations, we're actually going to start catering to the needs of adults who are aging as well. So one of the things of inclusive design is, can you solve for one and have that impact be beneficial for a broader audience? And we really think cognitive accessibility is well positioned to have a much broader impact on UX for everyone else.
Those 3 categories, you just distinguishing levels of severity?
It's a great question. Yeah, we
just repeat the question.
Sorry, this question was, for those different categories, are you identifying levels of severity? We got asked similar questions when we started engaging assistive technology users, of kind of like the skill level of using assistive technology. And we haven't gotten to a point where we feel like we've needed to do that on the assistive technology side. There is variance of users, but if you're collecting feedback from a good enough group of users, on cognitive, we're looking at it a little bit differently. Like we have to be a bit more intentional and aware of the full spectrum that exists across those different categorizations.
And I think it's important that it's not just one person just belongs to one category, right? They will belong to multiple, but there will be one that they have more of a challenge with. So our goal would be to be able to capture, okay, which ones do you identify challenges with, and which ones do you identify more challenges with as well?
For product teams, the thing that we've learned is most important is the predictability of the insights. And so if you're working with someone with severe memory challenges, there's different types of insights you're going to be able to collect than somebody with, maybe a light degree of memory challenges. So creating that predictability in our community for the product managers, designers, researchers who use Fable is where we're focused, and like it's a task at hand. And there's a curveball here that I think is like exciting to talk about, which I want to show you about, which is the intersectionality of barriers.
Yeah.
And so here's an exciting little data point from an initial research we've been doing.
So yeah, we recruited, I think about 25, 26 participants as part of our pilot study, as part of the Cognitive Accessibility Working Group, and individuals in that pilot study, 35% of them identified as using assistive technology on a daily basis. We talked about earlier about how there can be a category of individuals that don't use assistive technology at all, but we did still collect information on, like, do you use assistive technology and what type of assistive technology do you use? And we did find that, at least based on Fable's categorization of screen reader, screen mag, and alt nav, that they were individuals within the cognitive group that use those technologies. What was even more interesting is the next stat, which is 84% of our pilot participants use AT accessibility settings, different types of cognitive tools, and assistive devices. Folks have, what we realized as we went through this, even when we were doing a test of our recruitment method, we engaged a group to just see how they would respond to some of the questions we were asking. And I remember when I asked one of the participants, do you use assistive technologies? And their definition of assistive technology was different than what is typically understood. Like, we think about it as screen readers, screen mags. They were just referring to a couple of like system settings as accessibility. They're referring to some of the plugins that they had as assistive technology. So I think that also made us really reflect on just kind of broadening our perspective of assistive technology as well. And part of investing in the cognitive audience would for us to be able to capture, what do people just use for support? And that's kind of where we shifted our language to. And we got introduced to so many tools and devices that we also weren't aware of. And it was a really good learning experience for the cognitive working group. And it's something that we're going to take back to our community team to also look into.
Yeah, I think the intersectionality of technology and needs is going to be an area where we have to be a little bit more flexible in understanding the different ways that people choose to use their technology and all of the adaptations that we use. And this really helps us come back to that foundational thesis around that the work we do here and how it expands beyond just those who maybe identify as having a cognitive accessibility need. Whereas now we can actually say, this overlap includes this notion that there is a reliance on some form of technology and tooling that's also baked into the experience, and that likely is coming in from not a thing that product teams control. Yeah, as a product designer, you don't get to control whether or not the users you're serving also have other things installed that are interacting with your product. And in the case of cognitive accessibility, we're finding that that's a lot more prominent than we expected it to be.
What did you expect?
What did we expect?
I think it was more just us trying to find ways we can make it more easier to predict the type of tools and technology that people use. Because from a product team perspective, as a designer or researcher or developer, you want to be able to have a very clear guidelines of, here are all the things I want you to consider while building an application. And I think it's opening us up into, there's a lot of other devices, plugins that we have to consider for teams to understand that this is a broader spectrum to kind of capture. So I think it's going to be interesting for us as we take this to market, how individuals collect these insights and how they choose to action on it. But I think for us personally, for Fable, it was a big moment because we started questioning a lot of our own internal processes. We looked at our community team did a deep dive of, well, actually, why don't we go look at our own recruitment process? We realized our recruitment process had way too many steps, and this is not going to be accessible for the cognitive audience. So we ourselves are going and changing a lot of what we've built because we're keeping cognitive load top of mind now. But I think we're going to go through this process and we're going to help our customers, but it's going to be a learning experience.
the thing I just want to say on the slide as we kind of like race to the end here is that it's absolutely critical that we work on cognitive accessibility needs and as part of the broader accessibility practice. At Fable, our goal is to get this into our product by April 1st in a beta stage, and then launch it more broadly. But we're going to be publishing our learnings continuously. Mentioning like the AUS is Creative Commons. We'll be releasing a cognitive kind of version of it. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is trust in a proven framework. Inclusive design has this foundational argument, which is that if you pay attention to the unique elements of individuals, you develop processes, systems to facilitate effective engagement of those individuals who are perhaps looked upon as being outliers, those folks at the edges. The impacts are going to compound and be broader than the use case you're designing for. I think when it comes to cognitive accessibility, just where's your feeling around how that is going to ripple?
Yeah, I think we're going to see the most amount of broader impact with the cognitive audience. And that's what gets me personally excited. When we completed our pilot study as part of the Cognitive Accessibility Working Group, a bunch of our researchers, we all came together to like analyze the type of insights we got. And we kind of categorized them. Okay, this seems like an accessibility issue. This seems like a usability issue. There was a lot of things that we categorized as usability. And one of the researchers was, but all these usability issues are general usability issues. Like, how are people going to understand that this is also accessibility issues? And I was like, but that's the best part. Like, for so long, we've tried to take a very segmented approach of like, we do general gen pop research and then we go do accessibility research. And I think with the cognitive audience, we're going to prove that by actually prioritizing research with marginalized communities and prioritizing research with cognitive audience, we're actually going to capture a lot of usability issues that are not even going to be uncovered with gen pop research. So like my personal goal that I'm kind of like aiming for is that people actually start to put cognitive accessibility research as the first thing before even gen pop and just start to act on that feedback first.
We tried our best to keep that relatively short, folks. Thank you for your time, and we'll pass it over. Also, Ben Thomas, thank you.
Thank you for the great work you're doing. My name is Jose Garcia, native New Yorker. I was just curious if you tried considering the organizations that advocate for disabled, either cognitively or physically, because they often are very vocal about it.
Sorry, just to clarify, do you mean us engaging with specific organizations or end users for feedback?
So the government gives funds to nonprofits that advocate for disabled communities. So, for example, AHRC in New York, Easter Seals, and so on and so forth. Have you considered engaging? Because they're very vocal about these needs, especially around employment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so at Fable, we basically are constantly recruiting people with disabilities to join our panels. The way it works is they join us as contractors, they get paid for their time, they get paid to get trained, stuff like that. And we, generally speaking, our primary source of being able to do that recruitment is through partnerships with a bunch of nonprofits right across Canada and the US right now, and moving into Europe in the summer.
All right, I'm going to pull one from online. Let's see. What are the best practices for making tech documentation more cognitively accessible? That's a small question. Let's just tackle that in a minute.
Yeah, that's a very specific one. Honestly, if you figure it out, let us know, because we have a lot of that as well.
By documentation, I mean manuals and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's something that we have to get into testing it. We're actually going to get into it as our cognitive audience onboards onto our community platform and recruitment platform, because we have a lot of documentation and onboarding courses that our testers do. So our team is actually actively looking at how to update our own documentation. So yeah, we can follow up there.
the stuff we're doing as we delve into it so far involves multiple modalities for everything. So terms and conditions, there's an FAQ version, there's a video version. So like multiple modalities is foundationally a good practice, like a choose your own adventure to the mechanism that you best understand, and giving that agency to the users is a piece we're working through right now as we get ready to onboard a bunch of cognitive accessibility research participants.
Awesome. I see other great questions online that we're not going to be able to get to this evening, but please do throw them. We've captured them here, but yeah, please throw them into the Meetup chat if you have more. We'll figure out a way to follow up with those.
And I just want to add that we are going to be sharing some of our our learnings from the pilot. So that'll also be something that people can refer to as guidelines.
Yep.
And thank you so much for Thomas and Ben for having us here. Really excited to be back in New York. It's great that you have a community that comes together. So also thank you for everyone who attended online.